I am Erica Peplinski-Burge here with Mira Canion, and we are excited to talk to you about novel ideas, acquiring Spanish with Primaria, Capibaras, Mira Canion, and myself, Erica. So our plan for this evening, and by the way, as we go, if you have any questions, please feel free to speak up or throw your question in the chat. We will keep an eye on that. Today we are going to go over what is in a story, like why tell stories in the class. And a bunch of different things you can do to make your stories really sink in with your students, and then how you can go from the stories that we have in Primaria, from your short stories, into longer, beautiful novels like the ones that Mira has that are empowering for students and really help kind of level up their language game. So we are going to go over total physical response, personal question and answer, researching topics in your stories with the students ahead of time, some pre-story warm-up games you can play, things you can do during the story, and then things you can do after the story. And just so you know, I was a teacher for 18 years and taught every grade from pre-K to 8th. I have used Mira's novels with my own students very successfully, so I'm really excited to pass on all of these things to you. And Mira is this amazing author and world traveler, presenter, teacher. I know you said not to say those things, but I have to because you're so amazing. And Mira's huge talent, and I promise I am going to let Mira talk too, is that she can tell really interesting stories with very, very comprehensible language. And some of her books are some of my students' favorites. And so we are going to talk specifically about Capibaras con botas, or El Capibara con botas, Agua Tóxica, and La Perezosa Impaciente tonight. But they are all amazing titles. Thank you, Mira, for your contribution. Okay, so this is useful to you. I'm going to make sure I am continuing, but sometimes when I get excited, I talk a little quickly. So if I'm going too fast, please let me know in the chat. Pre-story, what can you do to pre-story? How do we get their brains warmed up and ready and making sure that as they're reading the story, they aren't having to stop every few seconds to say, what's that word? And what's that word? And what's that word? Because we want to make sure their brain is fully engaged in the story. One of the things you can do is total physical response, and we're going to go over that in just a minute. You can do personal questions and answers where you talk to the students using the new words. You can do activities before the story. You can do games before the story. And I just noticed I have activities on there twice. You can do activities, maybe not twice. So we're going to start with the vocabulary we have in one of our stories in Primaria Una, Unit 4. And there's a lot of vocabulary here. And I would not necessarily do a total physical response for every single word on this. But you can have students up and moving and touching these words. And there's a kind of a saying in neuroscience, I'm a big neuroscience person, that neurons that fire together wire together. So if we are teaching students action that goes with the new words that they're learning, that ties the memory to the right place in their brain, and it helps them acquire the language and recall it more easily. In Primaria, we do have total physical response gestures already planned out for you. A total physical response gesture is just a gesture that goes on the word with the word. So se pone, as you're seeing here, is pretend to put on socks. So you would say se pone, and you would pretend to put on socks, and you would have your students do that with you. They, for I see, is just pointing at yourself and then pointing at the student, like saying, I'm watching you. And los lentes, or the glasses, is pushing up some invisible glasses. And you can use the total physical response gestures if you're doing one of our stories that we already created for you. But you can also just make these gestures up with your class. You're not tied to the gestures that we have here in Primaria. For these ones on this page, I would practice se pone, clase se pone, and I would have everyone pretend to put on their socks. And then I might say se pone la camisa and have everyone pretend to put on a shirt. And I know that it's a little bit different of a gesture, but it's just, again, helping them realize that it means puts on, wears. I would say ve, sees, and have the class all practice ve or sees. And I would practice los lentes. In addition, I would have students go and touch different colors. I would say, show me something that is color rojo. And that's a bad example because I don't have something red next to me. Show me something that is anaranjado. And I would point at it And I would make sure to also clarify what it means, because even though I'm pointing at anaranjado, there could be kids that think that means scrunchy, or there could be kids that are colorblind and can't see the color, and so they don't know that orange is anaranjado. So I would say anaranjado, and I would say, what do you think anaranjado means? And I would have the whole class tell me, and I would have it up here, and I know that that's super obvious. It's in front of them, and I'm pointing at it, and I'm saying it, but you want to make sure that you're reaching all of your students. You want to make sure that your fast processors and your processors that are not picking it up as quickly are all understanding. And so make sure to clarify all of the words. And then I might tell students, go and touch something that's anaranjado, and go walk around the room. And I would say, oh, anaranjado. And I would say the things that they're touching and make sure I repeat it over and over and over and over, giving them lots of repeated and interesting exposures to this word. And then I will go that way through all of the colors. You can then move from that to personal question answer, where you're asking students questions like, do you like orange or pink? And then you could count the students and you could say, raise your hand if you like orange better. And you could go through and count the students in the target language, of course. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Oh, 7 students like orange. Raise your hand if you like pink better. Go through, count all the students. Oh, 7 students like pink. And these are just interesting ways, interesting because the students are sharing their opinions. And when you talk about yourself or what you're thinking, it lights up parts of your brain that are associated with reward. It makes you happy. It feels good. So these are just great ways to get these colors sticking in their brains without spending a ton of time on colors. And it also helps you to get to know your students better because you're talking to them about what they prefer. And it helps to create connections between your students because they're like, oh, I didn't know that Myra liked orange too. And it helps them realize that they have lots of things in common with all of the students in the class. So those are the TPR gestures. And you can do those to start to get those words in your student's head. And from there, you can move into pre-story activities. In Primaria, we have lots of pre-story activities built in for you. In fact, I wrote all the pre-story activities, so I highly approve of them. But you can create a lot of these on your own if you're not a Primaria user. You don't have to be a Primaria user to do any of these tricks that I am showing you. So this one, for this particular activity, we made a bunch of coloring pages, and the students got to pick their favorite animal, and they color it. And then you as a teacher walk around and you say, oh, the dog is blue. I like blue. Do you like blue? And so you're getting lots of, again, repetitions of these words you're wanting to get in their head. Oh, your cat's orange. I like orange. Do you like orange? And then you're talking about the animals and talking about these colors in an authentic context. And you're getting to know your students and talk to them individually. So you're kind of sneaking in some conversation at the same time in a way that feels not threatening to the students, that they lowers their affective filter because they're just coloring and they're talking about the colors that they're talking about. And if you do that, the students will get so much extra language while they're coloring, and so that you're not having to be up in front of the class the entire time, but they're still acquiring the language. The next activity that we have that I really love with this is I take those pictures I had the students color. And again, these are from Primaria, but you could pick any coloring pictures. It does not have to be these. And I tape them up around the room. And some I put in really obvious places, and some I kind of hide like peeking out from behind things. And I'll say something like, where is the orange animal? And the kids will have to go around the room and they'll say, aquí, here is the orange animal. And the only words they're allowed to say is here and orange. They can say complete sentences in Spanish, of course, but they're not allowed to say orange, orange, orange in English. And they find the animals. And it's super exciting. They love running around and finding things. The colors, they've made all the colors for me and they're coloring pictures. They love seeing their pictures up on the wall. And again, it's lots of really interesting repetitions of this vocabulary that we are front loading for the story that we're about to tell. The kids don't know a story is coming. It's coming. We're getting them ready, and they don't even really realize they're prepping for a story. They're just having fun and getting these words in their head at the same time. The next activity I do is just touch the color. Now that they've had lots of repetitions through the total physical response, through their coloring pages, where I was talking to them about the colors, through the hide and find, where they're looking for the coloring pictures all over the room. So they've had several days of repetitions of these colors. Now I play touch the color, where students just have to go around and I'll say, toca algo, touch something, and then I'll give them a color, like toca algo rojo. And they have to go around and touch something red. And they're allowed to say rojo, rojo, rojo. And they love actually running around the room shouting the color in the target language. And again, lots of free repetitions of the color while they're playing this game. And then they'll go around and they'll touch something. And then I go around and I say, oh, you're touching this and it's red. And you're touching this and it's red. And you're touching this and it's red. And it's movement and it's repetitions and it's getting in their head and they're getting to find things which they find interesting. They love this game. They will play this game over and over and over. And it's no prep for the teacher, which is also super helpful. And then just one more game I played with this unit was I Spy. Any games you can play in one language, you can play in another. And so we just talked about ve, I see, and lentes. So the kid gets up to the board and you can play it with a picture. Like what I would do for the story I was about to read, I didn't have time to do today, is put up a picture of a jungle because the bat we're about to read and the story about to read is in a jungle. And I would say, let's play I Spy with this picture. And I would start by saying veo, veo. And the class says, que ves? And I'll say veo algo verde. And the kids raise their hands and take turns trying to guess what I'm saying. And of course, I sneak in lots and lots of repetitions of ve and verde while they are guessing. And then whoever guesses my color or my I Spy gets to either go next, or if they don't want to go next, they get to pick the next volunteer. That lets your students who are introverts and want to play but don't really want to go up in front still participate without making them feel threatened, like, oh my gosh, if I guess, I'm going to have to go up there. So that is another favorite activity. And again, very low teacher prep. And you can start to talk about the jungle and what animals they might see in the jungle. And all of that is work to front load them for the story that we are about to tell them. And if you want to take it one step further, I would even sometimes look up videos about the animals in the story. Like for this, I just went on YouTube and said bats for kids and found this excellent video by Nat Geo, which I'm not going to make you watch. But I would just watch this with the students and be like, do you know, I learned about the most interesting murciélago, because I'm trying to front load that word bat last night. And I would just introduce it like that. And then we would watch this story. Get ready about bats, this little video about bats, and we would talk about the colors of the bats, what we think they see, what they eat, but all very, very, very basic language. Also, I think bats are super cute. I know not everyone does, but I think they're cute. So we would talk about whether or not they like them and all of these things in basic language, all of them front loading for the story we are about to read. And if you make these connections between the real world and the stories, it really helps kids start to explore the world in a way that's safe and interesting for them. Oops, there we go. So that was all we can do before we read. Now I'm going to talk about what we can do while we read, but I feel like I talked kind of fast. Does anyone have any questions before I move on? Or Maya, do you have anything you want to add? I know you have your part coming up, but I want to make sure you're good before I jump
on. Something that I noticed when you were going through there is another way to throw in some variety is to change past verbs that you have together with the current verbs you have. And so you had S and está in that particular unit. I don't know what you had in the unit before that, but let's say it was like the word jumps, which is very important for elementary kids, and jumps or runs or something like that. Well, then you can also look at changing up the verbs on there so you really get those. And then maybe have like a sock or a piece of clothing that the kids hold and give that color kind of like as a character. Like the green, el verde, so the green, literally the green color, whatever, jumps, and then have the kid jump. Right. And do things like that where all of a sudden the focus is not on the color, but the focus is on getting more repetition of the things that come into the storyline more than anything else. Right. So I was thinking of, for example, the green color looks at the blue color.
Ooh.
Ooh. Now, if this were high school, we'd say, and together they had the color what, or middle school or whatever, right? But elementary kids can do that too, because they're always talking about primary colors and how when you mix colors together, then you get different ones, right? Which is just talking about science and, normal things that we do to blend colors together. And so talking about that, and then having them, you have this color and this color, what color do you get? And using the word has. So blue and green have then this color, or like there is. So there is purple that comes out of this, or there's yellow, or whatever it is, and use some of those other things around the context of it. So that was kind of the things as I was thinking about that. And then when you're looking for what you're going to read, is to pull out those sentences that really drive the story and pull those out and see if you can put the vocabulary, like the color, and make it a character or something else that you've done in the past. So, or the kid, that has that favorite color, and that person is acting out the same lines that are important for the story. So that's another important thing we can do for, getting kids ready for the reading, because it is really about building sentences with kids during the pre-reading that really are the reading. And so when you put it all together, like, oh, we all know these, like this is great. But that process of having all those sentences now on a piece of paper is overwhelming for many people, right? Where one sentence is fine, but when we put it on a paper, it's like, oh my gosh, now it becomes academic and the spacing and all that. So getting as many as those as humanly possible back and forth. And Erica, as we talked about, when you introduce one vocabulary word, you have to go back 10 or 15 and review those, right? Like it seems like, oh my goodness, I can just throw all these out in here. It's like, no, just one word. The word is sees. And so every time you come in to class, because that word is very, very hard because it's confused with another word, the VA, goes, right? But every time you do that, you have the V right here, sees. And the teacher sees a student with red. Who does she see? And do guessing games, right? Who could she be seeing? Who does she see? She sees a pencil on the floor. She sees a pencil. Does she see one pencil or two, like over and over and over again? And maybe it's a red pencil, and all these things for, just playing. And these are normal things that happen in the classroom anyway, right? Like, who needs a pencil? Oh, I see a pencil. I see an extra pencil. I see a pencil over there. I see a red pencil, back and forth. And so that vocabulary is always coming with you in just normal contextualized language as well. And it's not just, ooh, let's read this for a story necessarily, but it's just always these things that come up over and over and over again. Oh, I see that somebody needs more time, because not everybody has a pencil, or not everybody, is in their seat, or whatever though. I see we have only 10 minutes left until lunch. Let's get this done. You gotta see, and just using those vocabulary words more purposefully in that particular unit, that you overuse them, or everybody's like, if you understand me, I want you to say, I see what you're saying, and just have the students do that every single time, maybe even, so that you're getting that comprehension check, maybe, for that. So that was my big addition in a small space that I was invited into.
It was an excellent addition. I love especially the cross curricular, because it's very powerful, and also admins are always looking for it. And I also love like the addition of getting lots and lots of like what I call free reps of those important vocabulary words. And also, really, that's how you build to 90% in the target language, is by making sure you're using these words that we're introducing in the story context in the everyday context, and making sure you continue to use them in the classroom. So excellent points all around. Thank you, Myra. I want to make sure I talk quickly through this so you have time to talk about all of your excellent slides. But there's lots of things you can do while reading. And I like to go with my students page by page so they're not feeling overwhelmed, like Myra was saying. Or when I'm doing the longer novels, like Myra's novels, which we're going to talk about momentarily, I like to go chapter by chapter, especially at the start of a novel. Though when we progress, I oftentimes will release students who are just excited to keep reading, let them read on their own. But at the start, it's good to help them get some reading strategies in their heads. There are lots of really great things you can do as you read the stories. Making predictions about what's going to happen next is one of the big ones. It's a higher level thinking one, but it's one that you can do very simply in the language. Like if you're telling a story about someone that's hungry, you could say, probable or possible. They want to eat a hamburger. And if they think that they probably do, students can raise their hand and you can count them. If you think they possibly do, students can raise their hand and they can count them. And that's a great way to make predictions, even with very beginning level students. I learned it from Carol Gobb many years ago without raising the effective filter, because they're just giving their opinion on what's happening next. They're not having to actually state something, which is just like a little bit maybe higher level language than our elementary students may or may not have. You can do student actors. After I tell a story, I like to have students act it out. That might mean I have a couple of students come out and they get to act out the parts of the story as I narrate. And that can be really, really fun. But that could also mean that you have students break into different groups. And if you have 3 characters in a scene, you have students break into groups of 3s. And you as a teacher narrate the story and have all of the student groups acting it out at the same time. I especially love this because having everyone act at the same time lowers the effective filter because they don't feel like anyone's watching them. And you as a teacher can walk around and see, okay, who knows exactly what to do when I say the word, and who looks around at their friends to see what their friends are doing first. And that's a really quick measure for you as to whether or not the students understand and how much they understand. The other thing you can do with the group acting is if you see a group that's like phenomenal and over the top and hilarious, you can film that group and put it up for your students to watch again at home. And students love to watch themselves. Of course, you have to check for permissions and make sure it's private, do all the safety things, but students love, love, love to watch themselves. I used to make music videos with my students every year, and I would get like 900 hits on these videos because they wanted to watch themselves acting out over and over and over and over. So this is a really powerful way to get lots of free repetitions that are engaging and fun for the students. Another great thing you can do are have students illustrate a comic strip about the story. For very beginner students with a comic strip, what I like to do is I actually write the story out for them under each little box on my comic strip. And then the students just draw the pictures to match. So that's kind of like they read and they comprehend and they draw a picture that shows me they comprehend. For my next level up students, and I've done this as early as 1st grade, I write most of the story and then I give them a word bank with some of those big words, like it might be S and a sta, and for this one, maybe sepone or lentes or ve, those words we were just practicing over and over. And the kids fill in the blanks from the word box and they draw the pictures. And then for your more advanced level students, they write the words and they draw the pictures. And for your really, really high students, you have them write the words, draw the pictures, and change 1 or 2 details. So that's an activity you can do with just a blank comic strip that's super low prep that you can hit students on lots of different levels and kind of meet them where they're at. You can even do different levels within the same class depending upon where your students are at. You can have students write alternative endings, especially your heritage speakers, your students who come in already speaking your target language. That's a fun way to engage that group that you can then read to the class. If you have a group of heritage students write an alternative ending, you can have, you can read the story to the class and then read it with their brand new ending. You're going to make those heritage students feel super seen and excited that their story is in front of the class and give them an extra challenge. We had a comment that said for kinder and 1st grade, they label the drawing with dotted letters so they can trace it. Oh, I love that because those kids need lots of extra practice with the handwriting, and that also again is getting the words in their head, starting them reading Spanish. I always had the words up, just like you said in the chat, even in kindergarten. And at the start of the year, they don't come in reading, but about halfway through the year, you're going to have some of the kids coming in and start to read those words in the target language. So you're just leveling them up. And last but not least, with the stories, I like to do reading groups. Now, in the elementary classroom, I was a classroom teacher for 4 years, like a general ed classroom teacher. They have guided reading groups where teachers will read with small groups of students. And they actually read the chapter with them and they talk about it. And what I like to do with my students after we've established how to read a story in the target language is I'll say to them, okay, if you are a really fast reader and you feel really good about this, you can go read this book by yourself. And those are usually my faster processors and my heritage learners, the kids who already speak Spanish. If you feel like you need a little bit of help, you can read it with one friend or two friends in a group of 3. And those are my kids who are, faster to mid-level processors, and they get most of the things. They don't need to read it with a class. They can do it on their own. And then I say, if you feel like this is just too much for you, come and read with me. And I have done that with every grade from 1st grade to 8th grade. And even those 8th graders will be like, yeah, I'm reading with you. And they'll come and sit on the floor and they'll engage with me and read with me. So the kids are really good at knowing where they're at. And if you make it like, oh, it's okay just to be where you're at and to let me know where you're at, then that takes away the like, oh, I don't want to everyone to know that I want to read with the teacher. Like, it's just like everyone's where they're at and that's just a fact. And we're going to meet you where you're at. And so that lowers the affective filter and makes the kids feel confident and good about their reading. Now, here is a story from Primaria, and I'm going to go over it really quickly so we have lots of time for Myra. But you see right here this word murciélago. If you're using Primaria, and that is a big word. Oh, thanks for coming. Someone had to leave early because they had something up, but thank you for coming. I was replying to a chat. This word in blue in Primaria is a word we think your students might not know. So if you hover over it in the actual program, it would pop up that it's a bat. But knowing that the story is coming up, I've already been talking about bats a lot. That was like that bat research that we did. So I have already been doing lots of front loading of those words. So you can either, if you have Primaria, you could just hover and let it pop up. But you can also like look at a story and say, what words in the story are my students not going to know? Oh, they're probably not going to know bat, and they might not know magic. I know magic seems like a cognate, but if you have students whose first language is not English, it's not going to be as much of a cognate to them. So you want to make sure you define words, even if they seem super obvious to you. So if I were starting with a story, I would have gone in and been like, oh, my students aren't going to know this word and this word. So I would have done some total physical response and snuck that into all of those activities we were talking about before. But if I was reading this with my students, I would say Marcel, and I'll do this in English just because I don't know what language everyone teaches. Marcel is a bat, and I would have the students do the actions with me. Normally, Marcel does not see colors. But Marcel has magic, I would have made up a TPR, magic glasses. With magic glasses, Marcel sees colors. So there is a lot of text here, but with the actions and with all of that front loading, it should be very, very comprehensible. If your students have more than a couple of words on the page they don't know, it kind of shuts down the process and they lose the story magic. So that front loading that we were doing is really important. Now, a way that I would do a prediction with this one, and I'm going to just go a little bit quicker for time's sake. It says Marcel is in Puerto Rico. And if you have a map, and in Primaria, we do provide the flags, I would point to Puerto Rico on the map. And we just had another comment that says, before the story, they introduced the fruit with a slideshow and a short video about tropical fruits. I love that. That's along the lines of the research we did. I love that. Perfect. It's like you read our minds. He explores Puerto Rico with the magic glasses. Marcel sees many fruits in Puerto Rico. So we're getting to the part with the prediction here. Marcel sees a carambola. Normally, Marcel sees the carambola in black and gray. But Marcel puts on his magic glasses. And before I reveal the next slide, I would say, what color do you think the carambola is? If you think the carambola is red, raise your hand. And I would go around and I would say, I see, again, using that language, the carambola that 7 kids, and count them on target, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, think the carambola is red. Raise your hand if you think it's yellow. And then I go around and count those kids. And again, extra repetitions. And then we reveal, oh, it's actually yellow. And they got to make a prediction, very basic language, and they got to confirm their prediction, which is huge for the brain and for reading and for comprehension and for all of the good things. And I'm not going to show you the rest of the story. Marcel eventually gets a bunch of really yummy fruit, but you could totally introduce that fruit in a tropical fruit slideshow, which I think is brilliant. You could hide the fruit around the room and have the students find it. There's a million different things you could do with that fruit. And there's a million different things you could do after the story. Finishing the story doesn't mean you have to be done with it. One of my favorite things to do is a smash doodle. And this came up online a long time ago. I don't know who the original creator was, but what you do is you take an interesting character from the story. So this is an example from class. The interesting character was a stack of pancakes, but it could be Marcella or one of the fruit from the story. And then you make up or tell a bunch of things about it. So I like to give sentence starters around these. So I would say like, my name is, I like, I don't like, I am how many years, I want, and I'm going to. But those were just the words I wanted my students to practice. You could totally change those sentence starters. If students know something from the story, they plug it in. Like they know his name is Marcel, so they would write Marcel here. They know that he wants fruit, so they would write fruit here. They know that he likes fruit, so they could write fruit here. But anything they don't know, students could just make it up. So you can get some really, Marcel doesn't like, you could write something like vegetables. You'll get some really funny answers. Students will come up with really creative things. Marcel is how many years old? Some students will make him like a baby. Some students will make him like a grandpa. And then you can make jokes about that as you share the student's work. What does Marcel want? Most students will get fruit there. And where is he going? Students might say like the fruit store or the ice cream fruit store. You get lots of creative answers. And you can project these and talk about them. You can throw them in a class book for lots of interesting extra reading. You can hang them in the hall. I promise you students will slow down and read them. These are, again, lots of free, interesting repetitions of the important words. Alternative endings. I like to have my students, like I said before, write an alternative ending. Independent reading. If your students are fast acquirers, you can assign different stories to them. You can have them do other reading. You can have them read other novels. You can have them read ahead. They don't have to read with you if they're ready to fly. There's no reason to stop them. The comic strips that I already talked about are great. You could do those after reading, or you could do them while reading. I've done them both successfully. Or you could have them do independent research. If there is a topic they were super intrigued about, have them do some extra research. There's no reason why. Part of what we do as language teachers is help them explore the world and make connections. So letting them research some cool things that they find intriguing or inspiring is always good. Now, these short stories are an excellent jumping point off to reading novels. Right? And it is so empowering for kids to read novels. They feel so proud of themselves. Look, I read a whole novel in Spanish. They feel super proud of themselves. And it's such a jump up in their reading abilities and their learning abilities. And it just does so many great things on so many levels that I don't have time to tell you all of them right now. But the stories in Primaria Una all feature animals. And the books we're going to recommend for my elementary teachers through Mira all feature animals. They build empathy for others, and they create connections between students, as well as helping them explore the world and other cultures. And then there's always the next chapter to go on to. So it creates excitement for the next class, which is basically all of the good things. I'm about ready to pass this on to Myra, but this is something I did when I was introducing her Capibara con Botas, which was one of my favorite novels ever to do with students. We did that trick where we explored capybaras with National Geographic, and then they got to make their own pet capybara. And so this is a sheet I made for my students, and they got to make up their own pet capybara. And again, this is lots of interesting repetitions of words they're going to see in the book and words I want to get in their brain and words I want to review. And then again, I throw that in a book for my students to read, and there's all sorts of free repetitions going on. I talk too much. I want to make sure I pass this on to Myra so she has plenty of time to talk about her interesting things. I'm going to zip it now.
Yes, there are many ties that you can use for kids, especially the tie that putting everything in a book in a binding all of a sudden goes, oh, we've read a book. Or there's this frightening piece of like, I can't read books, I don't read, or whatever that might be. And I think a lot of times what happens when we talk about books in elementary or even, middle school and high school is when we try to use the more, I would say, grade level types of books. For example, if there's a couple of different books we're talking about when we talk about elementary. One is the illustrated book. The kids illustrated book is really leveraging the caretaker language that you heard orally throughout your childhood before you can be able to take the print text and match it to what you know, that you've heard before you're able to do that. It's the pre-literate. That's those types of books. Now they're full of language, and probably because kids just don't question it as much, they just kind of take it in. They look at the images. They're very, enthralled with that. And it's kind of like, what that is kind of like watching a movie like Shrek, and you're 6 years old and you don't get all the sexual innuendos, and you're like, oh, that's really funny. And it's like, and the adults are laughing for a different reason, but the kid is laughing because it's slapstick. It's just silliness, the action and stuff. So that's kind of what's happening. So when you're trying to read a book like that to a early language learner, it's always recommended, like, oh, read picture books. Wow, there's a lot of language in there that you just don't have for that. I mean, you could read a couple of things like brown bear, where do you see? And it goes back and forth over and over again. Well, what tends to happen, though, is you have a lot of these obscure words, horse and different types of animals that are not necessarily part of the curriculum, right? So the focus then is lost, and then all of a sudden the kids are looking at 27 different words for that particular book. And it's like, okay, what was the key word we're learning? Oh, I don't remember, but I remember like 5 of the animals. And then you kind of wonder, did that really make a difference by using that particular book? The second type of books that we also have in elementary are the I can read it book. So they're divided into, I think there's like 4, maybe 5 levels, where the kids pick them up and they have a 1, a 2, or 3, or a 4 on them. And they have 1 image, 1 sentence, 1 image, 1 sentence. And they go through there like that. And that's kind of what TPRS or storytelling types of things tend to be more of, but they also fill them in which they're repeating it over and over again. Unlike that pre-reading book. And then you get into more of these chapter books. So a book like El Capibara con Botas is a combination of that, which means you have both, right? You have the image and you have what's called the repetition of that text. So it's not just 1 sentence, it's maybe 4 or 5 sentences. And so all of a sudden it seems it's like a mixture of the chapter book together with the I can read it book, and then the entertainment, maybe, hopefully, of the illustrated book. So anyway, I don't know if that's, I can't read any of the chat, by the way. I don't know why that is.
I am keeping an eye on it, Myra.
There's nothing showing up. And my computer says that I need to plug it in. I'm like, what? So if I go blank, then that's what's happening. But I probably should plug that in, huh? So can you flip to the next one for me, Erica? We just take a look at that as I'm plugging in my computer. Take a look at that. And based on what I just told you about different books, what do you see happening there? Like, is that true what I said? Is part of it, make.
Yep. Myra's plugging in her computer. Peruse her excellent first page of El Capibara con Botas.
It's what we do as teachers all the time. Like, oh, yeah, I just went to the bathroom. Don't tell anybody. Come back in my classroom. Nope, she wasn't gone. She's still here. So what did you notice from this? You go through, and I can translate. I think everybody speaks probably enough Spanish or doesn't speak any Spanish at all, which is still good, because I think a lot of this is really based off of leveraging the way it's written so that everybody can access it pretty fast. So when you go through, Carlos es, let's pretend we don't know that. I don't know what that is. I don't know what UN is. Okay. What's animal? Everybody knows what animal is. And then you say interesting. Well, sometimes that's hard as well, right? Where you're like, Carlos is interested in an animal. I've had adults tell me that where it's like, no, not quite. It's an, he's an interesting animal, but you just skip it and you keep going. It's Carlos S. Oh, there's S again. What's S doing there? Like, what can that mean? There's un. Wonder what that means. Capibara. Now, when you've done all that pre-work in this particular unit, maybe of looking at this animal and where it lives and what it does and all these things, you start looking at things like, oh, it's blank, rat, what, and you hide maybe the last part of that word, and it reveals R-A-T, rat, helping students just see that at first, right? So I do a lot of times where I do a cover up. So as you're trying to, and this is a lot of inference or just guessing, is that when you try to go through and just fill in and hide the last part of the word, sometimes you focus more on, oh, I know what that word is. It looks just like English. Yeah, that's what it is. Or sometimes when you take both sides of your hands and cover up a word, especially when it starts with es, like especial, then you take off the e and you see the word special in that. So we have here where Carlos is a super grande rat, right? So that's a capibara. And so going really slowly like this really assures that what we're doing is we're also showing how to read this when we don't know. When we don't know, we stop, we look at the word to see if maybe there's something that would fit the context as we go, and then fill in what we know for background. So the background knowledge is number one for reading comprehension. And when we know a lot about this particular animal in the environment, we can fill that in a lot quicker as a reader. So then we have the second paragraph here. Carlos, there it is again, es. We've learned the two paragraph, we have the same verb over and over again. It doesn't seem like we have, but now that I look back, I'm like, oh, it's the same verb. But there's a lot of information in that, right? There's a place. We're talking about two things that are really, really big. This big rat and the Amazon. And so some of your kids probably would think, oh yeah, we get packages from them all the time. Yeah, we do. Like the different, Amazon versus, the jungle, the tropical forest and stuff. So going through this, step by step and just showing like, oh, I didn't quite know what DE means. Carlos is Ecuador. Is Carlos Ecuador? Can he be Ecuador? What's Ecuador? Like prepping all of this beforehand then with maps, and having kids maybe have a big map and having them, jump around and say, oh, the color green is now in Colombia. The color green is in Ecuador. The color green is in Argentina. And jumping that around with a document camera, or having a kid do that. Having all the kids do that, where they have a map in front of them and they're pointing back and forth using the colors. If you're using the Primaria colors, for example, and using that back and forth when you're reading this, then all of this stuff, you're not stopping and like, hey, you never taught us Ecuador. What's that mean? Because Ecuador to them is just this word that you never taught them. So is Carlos for that matter. And so going through this one by one, we see we can build the language pretty quickly. We have a character, again, in storytelling or in fiction, let me say it that way. In fiction, we're always talking about story elements. So we want to make sure the reader knows who is the main character, where is the main character, what's the setting, and then what the problem is. And we're not quite, do we have a problem yet? Not quite. We don't quite have a problem, but the third paragraph we do. So we have Carlos. He's a big rat of some sort. He's a capybara, and he's from Ecuador. Now we have a problem then. He's different. And here's my background knowledge again. He doesn't something. He doesn't something. I don't know what he's doing. Okay. He doesn't do something. And then tiene, and then patas diferentes. It's amazing to me that kids actually remember patas diferentes more than the word tiene all the way through. And it's because number one thing that we want to also remember is tiene and quiere are the same word to most learners. And when you get that confusion all the time, it's not that you didn't teach well. It's just, it's very confusing. It just, it's kind of like me going into Starbucks and ordering the biggest and saying, well, tall is the biggest. And actually I get the smallest cup ever from Starbucks because I ordered tall and they should call it short, right? But it's a confusion. So then we talk about has something different. He's got something different, and he doesn't have something palmeadas. I don't know what palmeadas is. And then again, we cover it up. Palm. Oh, palm. Like I can palm something. Oh, palm. Oh, let's look at the image. What's in the image there? Oh, there's something he does. He's got different kinds of patas. So he's got different paws or feet, right? And so going back and forth with preloading some things in there about the semi-aquatic animal, and then reading it at the same time and guessing and taking really good guesses of what that can mean. We're building that and showing and modeling how to read, when we get confused together. And then the last part there for this is Carlos Tien. There's that word again. Where else did we see that word? Where did we see that word? Oh, we saw it up here. And so if I'm going, with kids through this, it's like, where else did that word appear? Okay. Tiene. And then it was next to un problema. Carlos, what could that possibly be? Carlos blank problem. Causes problems, makes problems, spits problems, like what could it possibly be? And so a lot of times I have kids guess wrong. I'm like, what could this not be? Like, what would be the worst thing you can have for TNA or whatever? And we do that back and forth. And that part of it is taking an inference, contextual clues of what goes along with that. And the next thing, it's not just a matter of saying has problems, it's also he's different. Well, I mean, different is not necessarily a bad thing, right? Like when you're different, you stand up and you stand out in the market. You're unique, right? I mean, so it's not always bad. It could also be good, but we're leveraging together something problem, different, and he doesn't do something. And he's got something that's different, the different pause. What is tiene? Has. There we go. We got it to be has. And then we go down there and says Carlos has. And then we have mama, papa. Now when we go through, what we're doing really, really clearly is saying, when I don't understand, I'm going to go up and find that same word and go back and see what it meant in that context, and then go back down and apply it again. And these are all tricks that we do all the time as readers, or as, negotiating of whatever our world is, that a lot of times we get very narrow-minded, or blinders on, where we don't know what that sentence is and we give up, when really it's more of, okay, where else have I seen this? And this, again, this is also very good test taking skills, right? And it's the number one reason why kids don't do well when we're playing games that are the computer games where it flashes one sentence up and then they have to answer like A, B, or C, is because they don't have all the other things to look for, the clues. It's just boom, there it is. And if you ever wonder, in the Kahoots and all the other quizzes that we do that are electronic, they're like, wow, the kids didn't score very well on that. Yeah, it's because they can't leverage what I just showed you, right? And that's what I always did. I always scored better on a test when I could go back and look at that. So these are just some of the things that you can do with a longer text. And longer texts are really much better for kids because they can go back and forth and build the vocabulary, like I was saying, has, all the way through now. And that's going to help when I go back and maybe talk about, oh, his dad is a big capybara. His dad is cruel because Carlos doesn't swim well. Oh my gosh. There's where I maybe have a prediction. Like, what's going to happen? Like, is he going to yell at him? Is he going to push him in the water? Is he going to take away his allowance? Like whatever it might be. But that's where you're talking about those predictions as well, really quickly, where it's not like the end of the story. This is just at the very beginning, so that they're thinking of things that could possibly happen, and getting them really engaged into the storyline. And I think things like this, where I think every kid that I've ever met has an adult who has not been the kindest person to them because they weren't able to do something well. And the point isn't to make a list of all of those and then go through them like, okay, who's got the meanest dad? That's not the point. The point is the emotional engagement of connecting with that character, going, oh, he's got a mean dad because he doesn't swim well. Well, how can he not swim well? He doesn't have the right, gear. He doesn't have the web feet. And that's really the engagement you're looking for. It's like, do you think he's sad? Do you think he's happy? Do you think he's contented? Just okay with that? Which one would it be? And those are the things that you keep engaging, but without going down a path. And I know elementary is kind of hard, where you mentioned one thing and it's like they tell you 25 things, like, well, last summer my dad was mean. Like, no, we're not talking about that. We're talking more of, what do you think is this character feeling like? And then you can expand it more, of course. But so there's too much information right away of how to use the reading. But I think what I've gone through in a nutshell is really going back and forth and showing and modeling that. And that's what you would do when Erica was talking about those reading groups. When I would do that in middle school and high school, is I would just rotate the groups around so they all met with me in some way. And that's the kind of stuff we would do, is that I could tap it and then I would see who has that word has and who doesn't. And then what kind of strategy that learner was doing in a group of 4 to 6. Like, gosh, I don't know what that word is. Where would I, like, how would I figure out what that word is? Maybe I could sound it out. Tiene. And then read the whole thing. Carlos, tiene un problema. Oh, my teacher says that all the time. Like, that means a problem. Yeah, there you go. Maybe it's sounding it out. Maybe it's just going back and finding it. So spot checking that in your reading groups for that. So I have now forgotten everything that's on the rest of the slideshow. This is a typical teacher, right? I just put that in. I put that in English in case you didn't understand. So there you go.
That was most excellent. And that's good because we only have a very few minutes left. I talked.
That's perfect. So I don't have to come up with anything novel in the next two minutes or whatever. But this is a sheet that I put together of when I'm going through. It shows you really quickly how easy the book can be, because it doesn't have a lot of stuff in there. I have non-action verbs, because I really want to focus on that. They're the hardest to learn, I think, sometimes. And I'm looking at it and I see words at the very bottom like talks, ask a question, and says. So I know there's going to be some dialogue in there. So every time I have a dialogue with a puppet or a kid, the teacher says, sit down, or Simon says, and play games like that to get to those kind of things. Is happy, está feliz. So I'm also asking, all just every time kids come in, I'm like, oh, who's happy today? Oh, it's Friday. Oh, great. Everybody's happy. Oh, I'm not happy because tomorrow's no school. Oh, I'm sad. There's no school tomorrow, right? I'm so sad because I have to go home, or whatever. It could be that I really am sad or whatever, or there's a competition, or there's a lot of things. It's not necessarily the right answer, but I'm being funny sometimes in invoking, like, getting kids to talk about just what's happy, what makes them happy because the day of the week, or they're wearing a color of shirt that they don't like. If you're drawing, something with colors, is from, has, and is nice. Those words tend to be a little bit harder sometimes because they're not full of action. That's why I put them separately. So you're really going to have to focus on those. Then the action words, you can do a lot of TPR. You can do TPR with the other ones, but these are just really quick. And you also go through the book and say, the word like chokakon, that only happens a couple times, and it's towards the end. So are the other ones too at the bottom there. So the ones you want to focus on are on the top that I put on there. And every time you do maybe a reading or some kind of a story or a novel, is, think about doing something like this, where it's saying, okay, now I mentally know every time a kid says está feliz, estoy feliz, I'm going to really emphasize that, and then put a couple other words around it of different emotions. And then I'm also, every time, we talk about swimming or anything about water, I'm going to put nada bien, because I know that's coming up. Or we talk about, oh, I can't swim today because, say I can't swim today because hurricane went through. It's not a good time. I can't swim in Florida today because there was a hurricane. There's strong winds or whatever. And that's a context right there too. So, yeah, in a nutshell, that's kind of like how you would look at all of what Erica was saying with all the pre-reading, and then looking at a bigger, I guess it would be unit, so to speak, or a task for a teacher to say, how do I teach then a full novel? And it's just one bite at a time, and really taking those verbs and going, okay, where would this fit? Have I done all these? Can I do all the pre-reading knowledge base, like what animal is this? Some of the geography and some of the behaviors of animals is very, very important that kids know. That number one will, like what we're saying about bats, is that they are nocturnal animals. You shouldn't be seeing them during the day unless there's a problem, right? When kids know that, then the story makes more sense. You can start to infer more, because that bats come out at night. They actually use is it a sonic system where they bounce off, different sound waves and stuff. So kids will tell you that too. And that's what you especially want to do, is you want to get kids with a photo, and just have them, do dumps of what information they already know, because they want to tell you. Believe me, when kindergartners tell me, here's how you go into this computer and do this YouTube, I'm like, thank you. I didn't know anything about finding a YouTube, and let's say, like, they're always ready to show me, what I need to do as a kindergartner, so, and let them do that to a point about content knowledge too. So
They would. We are out of time. I wish we had time for more. Just really quickly, not to cut you off, Mira, but to wrap it up, our suggestions when we kind of compare Primaria with Myra's novels were to, depending on the age of your students, how long you've had them, to pair Capibara at the end of Primaria Una. And then for Primaria Dos, you could start with Agua Toxica, which is like the prequel to Capybara. Kids love prequels. They get super excited. And then from there, do Primaria Dos and then end with La Perezosa Impaciente, which is like the next level up. So that is how I would do those novels with Primaria if you are working with both. They are fabulous novels that do all the things that they said. I hope this was helpful. Myra has a lot of, I thought we had Myra has a lot of resources on her website. I will put that in the chat. I thought we had it on the slide. I'm
This,
sorry, it is
this
not
slide,
there.
the slide in the former slide.
The slide before it? Oh, there it is. Okay. Hooray. I don't have to look for it. So there is Myra's website.
It was in the rainforest.
Yes, I was focusing on other things. I hope that this was helpful for all of you. Thank you for all that you do. Thank you for Myra. Oh, we have someone in the comment who met us at CI Summit, Myra, and they have a picture with you. They're a big fan. That's awesome. Thank you so much for attending and being here with us tonight. I hope it was helpful. Please feel free to ask us questions if you have them. And thank you so much to Myra for being here as well.
Thank you.
Have a wonderful rest of your night and the rest of your year. We appreciate all of you.